All right. Hello, everybody, and welcome to the Nature Journal show. Today I'm here with Lee Carlson, natural science illustrator and eco-reportage artist that will be teaching painting textures fast and slow at Wild Wonder 2024. Welcome to the show.
Hi, Marley. Thank you for having me.
Yay, it's good to have you. I feel like I just interviewed Kate Rudder an hour ago, and I feel like you
Yay.
two have both probably been on the show like 3 times at least. So it's good to have you on here again. Let's
Yeah, thank
dive
you.
into your class so that we can cover some stuff about your class.
Oh,
So,
great.
um, painting textures fast and slow. Do you have any like pages nearby that you can reach that would sort of show visually a little bit about what you're going to be teaching in the class?
Yeah, definitely. So I wanted to do this topic because I definitely one of my big motivations when I go to draw something is paying attention to the really cool textures in it and drawing it. And I have a bunch of different ways that I do that, but some that I definitely fall back on more than others. And so what I wanted to do with this class was to really work on a sort of a wide range of different ways of drawing textures in a sketchbook and ways to make those suit all of the different potential conditions you might find yourself in when you are nature
Mm.
journaling, so that there's a variety of different tools for when you have very little time to when you have a lot more time to sort of expand. So I will start with, so what sort of my most natural way of drawing texture is
Hmm.
with line, because that's my absolute preferred way of drawing, and it's what I default to and what I love the most is ink and line. And so I definitely default to lots of detail built up through lots of lines. And so that first
Whoa.
one was with a brush pen. This is with a fine line pen and brown ink. This is some bristlecone cone and
Wow,
trunk.
that cone looks crazy.
Yeah, and so it's really fun to really focus in and bring out all of that detail and texture and three-dimensionality. That's the other thing
Wow.
that texture can help you do, is really give shape and form. But of course, that took me a long time. And I
Yeah.
had the time to spend. And also, it was something that doesn't move on its
Hmm.
own. So it let me have that time to spend. Um, and so this is, I love drawing this way. I draw this way all the time. This one is based on something that gave me the time because it's a photo. I was not drawing from the real bird here. But again, an example of when you have the time to really dig in, how nice it is to get lost in the details and build up the texture that way. But what I also really like to play with is, how do you still capture all of that exciting texture and three-dimensionality, and that the way that all of those give life to what you're drawing fast. And
Yeah.
so, oops. So this is an example of California newts from the trail. The nice thing about newts is they don't move very fast. They move faster than a pine cone, but they don't move that fast. So you still have a little bit of time, but this is still something that you don't have all the time in the world, and also maybe you need to keep moving on your hike as
Yeah.
well. And so I do a lot of experimenting with how to use my either my pen or my brush in a much faster way to still get a lot of texture without having
Mm.
to spend a whole lot of time building up lots and lots of tiny lines. And another thing, so to explain just slightly more about the philosophy of this class itself, we're going to focus on two different organisms. And because I think it's really important, because it's a part of everything that I do in my nature journal, is I also want all of my teaching to incorporate learning some new things about the organisms
Mm.
or environments that we're drawing. And so I picked two organisms that the texture of their skin, of their outside, tells us a huge amount about their life and how they fit into their ecosystem. So we're going to look really closely at a California newt and at a banana slug. And we're going to talk about why all of the different aspects of their skin matter and how it helps them live in their environment. And then we're going to, with each of them, experiment with a few different ways to draw that texture. And so the fast method that we're going to spend the most time on is with using, instead of using a brush pen, using a paintbrush and paint sort of as the primary drawing tool. So rather than thinking of it as painting with watercolor, we will be drawing with watercolor, going back to just the lines that are my favorite thing, but doing so with color, because if you do that, it makes it possible to, I'm going to try and find another example here too, makes it possible to get even more information and life into the, I guess this is really all one color, but it is a color, into the drawing really fast, because you're letting the watercolor sort of do its own thing and how it mixes. In this case, it was much more with just the density of pigment rather than the color. But because this was a colored ink, it sort of does have a bit of a color change from dark to light there. And so that's what we're going to do for our fast texture technique. And then we'll experiment with both of those organisms with some slower techniques, the building up of lines, either with brush pen or with a fine liner, and then also with working with layers. So if you have more time, doing some, initially putting some watercolor down, giving that a chance to dry, and then adding more watercolor on top of that to help build up texture as well.
Cool. Yeah, sounds fun. And I really like the way that you explain on your class description how the texture is not just an aesthetic thing, but how it's relevant to the different species that you're looking at. Why do you think, besides sort of capturing the look of texture, why do you think this class is important? Like, what is your pitch for how this is an important class?
Well, I think you actually mostly said it at the beginning of your question there.
Okay.
It's definitely because texture is fun. And like I said in the beginning, texture is a really great way to make your sketch come to life on your page and look more three-dimensional and realistic. But most importantly is there is a reason that everything that is out there that we're drawing, there's a reason that it has the texture that it does, and that that is going to be able to tell us so much about the way that that organism lives, whether it's the bark on a tree, like that bristlecone, telling us a huge amount about the environment that those bristlecones live in and what kinds of conditions they survive and how their texture helps them do that, to being able to tell interesting things about what an organism has been doing right before we saw it, looking at the texture on it, which we'll talk about with the slug and the newt, and just what their needs are and how they interact with their environment. And so I think it's a really lovely way to go out into the world with your eyes open to what are the textures that I'm seeing and what do they tell me about the organisms that I'm looking at? What can they tell me about that organism's past and future, and what it needs and what it faces out in the world?
Are there times when you're nature journaling that you find that depicting the texture is not helpful or maybe even distracting?
Oh, sure. I mean, when I'm drawing in the field, it's always a balancing act of what is it that I think is most important to get down on the page right now, and what drew my attention to what I'm drawing. And absolutely, texture is not necessarily one of the things that I'm focusing on right then. It could just be because I don't have time and I had time to draw an outline, and that's going to be what helps me remember what I saw. It could be that what I was really focusing on was color, or was everything that was around this organism. And so I didn't want to spend the time on the texture. So absolutely, I'm certainly not always drawing textures.
Sometimes I've noticed that if I spend a long time drawing a rock or a tree or an animal and getting the proportions and everything right, and then I'm like, wow, the texture or the feathers are so cool, and then I start putting the texture over everything, and suddenly all the volumetric work and the proportions kind of get all weird.
Yeah, and I think that's definitely something that, again, always a balancing act, especially if you focus in on the details. If what was important to you was the bigger picture, like you said, the volume and the overall shape. Focusing in on the really tiny details can absolutely make it hard to maintain, some of the bigger proportion aspects. So again, I think it is just a question of what was it that I wanted to capture here? And it's okay I don't have to get lost in every single detail, and texture
Yeah.
absolutely can be details. Oh, and that made me think of one more thing, and we're definitely going to talk about it in the class, which is, especially with texture, it's not critical. It can be really helpful to remind yourself that if you draw some of the texture, you can then leave it alone. You don't need to cover the entire thing in
That's what I was
texture.
just gonna say,
Okay.
because like on your website, so I'll put up your website here so people can check it out. But if you scroll down to the bottom of Robin's website, there's a really cool toad, and that toad, and I think you did this with the banana slug that's on the thumbnail for this video as well. There's all of this intricate texture and color in some places, but then there's part that it's still like the unfinished drawing, and that's a really cool look.
Yeah, I thought I would bring this up too. Wrong way. There we go. So this is looking up the trunk of a Douglas fir, and it had an amazing, amazing texture on it. And I wanted to draw that. But I also think that with a lot of times when you do fill in the entire thing with the texture, it actually makes it harder for a viewer to see the texture. It all sort of blends together and it loses its distinctness. And so I think not doing all of it is often really helpful for drawing your eye into what was important, and not just seeing this sort of wall of detail.
Cool. Okay, there's a couple of questions from the audience that I'm going to get about supplies, and I'll get into that in 1 second. But one other question for the class is, how are you going to make the class, or how would you describe the class for people that are at different levels? Like, is there something that beginners can get out of it, but also people who are more advanced? Roseanne told me that all of the classes at the conference are supposed to be like beginner level or all levels. How do you think your class will like sort of address that?
Yeah, so I am absolutely targeting this to all levels. We're going to do a lot of drawing. I mean, it's going to move fairly quickly, but one of the really beautiful things about Wild Wonder is being able to go back to all of the videos and rewatch them. So that's what I certainly appreciate when I watch other people's, is knowing that I can always come back and watch again for the details. But we are going to start from the beginning. We're going to start with practicing with all of the tools that we're using. We're not going to jump right into drawing an organism right away, but practice first with just because I do have some really specific things that I do with a pen when I'm making texture, some really specific things I'm thinking about in the way that I'm making my strokes and the way that I am building everything up to create texture. And so we're going to start with small samples like that, so that it's not intimidating trying to put it into an actual drawing of an organism at first. And we're going to do the same thing with the technique that I talked about, using a brush and watercolor to draw with, especially since I find it very hard to not just start painting as soon as I have a paintbrush in my hand. And so practicing that very intentional, we're using this brush much more like a pen. We're going to be drawing with it. We're not filling stuff in. We're just doing outlines, but we're doing those with letting our colors blend together. We will definitely be doing that as practice strokes and exercises before we actually apply them to an organism. So
Cool.
It is definitely meant to bring everyone along, and show, as it definitely a wide range of things that will hopefully introduce more experienced people to some things they haven't tried before, but still have the time and the instruction for beginners to follow along as well.
Cool. Okay, so let's talk a little bit about supplies for the class. First, I guess there's some questions here. James, who's in the live audience, was asking about tiny brushes.
I don't use super tiny paint brushes all that much. The brushes I use the very most are a couple of dagger brushes. And you can see sort of for perspective in front of me, these are, they're not that tiny. This turquoise handled one is fairly small. I can't remember it's a 1/4 inch. It's the smallest one. And then I use a bigger one. And I just use them a lot like a brush pen so that I'm using the very tip for fine lines, but I like that dagger shape because I can really easily also flatten it down into a much broader stroke at the same time, and they hold a decent amount of water.
Cool. Sounds like a versatile paintbrush. And then James had another question, and Gail was also wondering about this colored ink or watercolors in a jar already.
So I actually, when I'm painting this way using the watercolor as a drawing tool, I'm actually still just doing it straight out of a palette. I'm not diluting them. I'm not actually using them like ink. I do use colored ink sometimes, but that's not what we're going to experiment with here. I just use a nice wet brush. And the reason also that I sort of do it the same way as I paint is that I'm sort of messily picking up one color, then coming back and picking up another color and letting them mix together on my page as I go. And so it's sort of the same flexibility just as painting in the field with a little palette. And so this is what, for the class, we'll be using something small. I'm not going to be using any more than 6 colors for the workshop, almost certainly. And I will definitely be posting the list of tools on Sked once that's
okay. Up. So just a reminder, I've mentioned this in other interviews, but there is this whole platform called Shed or Sked, sked.com. And on around September 5th, I believe, that is going to get set up. And people who are have bought their tickets for the conference, you have to do this whole like registration process through that. And then you click on which classes you want to take. And then you can even get emails from instructors, or you can look at the class and they'll put more information under the class there. I'm going to do a whole video where I talk about that because it's sort of a, it's a little bit of a, another loop that you have to hop through, or whatever the expression is. It's another thing. It can be a little confusing for people. And it's not up yet, so don't worry about it, but I'll try to make a video all about that. And okay, so there's going to be more info about supplies, but it seems like usually your classes are sort of flexible about supplies, right?
Very. So yeah, so I this is completely doable with whatever watercolors, or I mean, truly, this would work great with colored ink in a jar, or like Dr. P.H. Martin's watercolors in jars. This would be a fantastic time to experiment with that too. I'm not going to be doing that personally, but this would work great for that. It works great with whatever watercolors you have on hand. And so I will be posting the exact watercolors I'm using because I know that matters to people and they want to know exactly what's being used there, but that is not necessary at all. I will just be using an ink pen. I'm not sure I'm going to use a brush pen in this one, but people could definitely do it with a brush pen and then watercolor and brush. But I will put the details just in case people need to know exactly what they are.
Okay, yeah, if I have enough time, I'm going to try to make a video or like a list where I summarize all of the supplies in one place. I did it in 2019 after the conference, and I like even from all of the classes, like what teachers mentioned in the classes, but it was
that's a lot of work.
Yeah, it was a little bit too much, and but I'm gonna try to do at least something like that in advance, because it does seem like it's hard for a lot of people to kind of figure it all out in advance, and it makes a big difference when you're at the class and you feel like you're ready. So
yeah.
Okay. Last 2 questions about your class is, what is the most important, besides supplies, what is the most important quality or mindset that students can bring to your class?
Ooh, definitely curiosity about how organisms fit into their environment and how the different things that we see about them and can record in our sketchbooks can take us deeper into those connections.
Cool. And then when they leave, what are they going to leave with, or how will they be different?
Well, I hope that they're going to leave feeling personally closer, more of a personal connection to both the California newt and the banana slug, because that is definitely what I'm hoping to foster. And then feeling empowered to take that information out into their own outdoors and start asking similar kinds of questions about the interesting things and interesting textures that they see there.
Cool. Great. Awesome. And then a last sort of teaching question about your class. How would you describe your teaching style and teaching background?
So yeah, my teaching background is both online and in-person classes, and they all follow the same philosophy that I said was important in the development of this one, which is that I am using the art technique instruction and examples um, as a way both of sharing really interesting information that I know about whatever it is the topic that we're looking at. So whether it's about pollinators and flowers, or whether it's about slugs and detritus on the ground, I definitely want to use art as the way of showing people what I've learned and what I think is absolutely amazing about these interactions and connections in the environment. And then because of that, I want that enthusiasm to be contagious and for people to take that into their own investigations, using artwork to bring themselves closer to whatever is around them outdoors.
Great. Cool. So the idea with these interviews and talking about the classes and stuff is so folks watching can get an idea about the different instructors and help get excited. Also maybe make some decisions. People do have to pay money to go to this conference, and some people don't have time to do all of them. So thanks for sharing about like your class and your teaching style and all that. And another thing too that I think is important to mention is it's good to look at people's styles. So I'm going to put your Instagram link up here now. It's good to look at the different teachers' sort of artistic styles. And even though, as Robin mentioned, there's a deeper element to learning about nature, and we're going to get into that more in a minute, but I do think it's important to like resonate with the style. And I just want to say that you're one of the artists and nature journalers whose style I really like. And when I see stuff, when you post stuff or I see stuff that you've made, I have to look at it. I'm like, whoa, okay, what is going on here? What did Robin do? Like, how can I like copy this? So for those of you who are watching at home, trying to figure out how to be a good student, how to make the most out of the conference, I recommend looking at the teachers' styles. And these interviews, hopefully you get a little bit of that too, because it is a valid deciding factor and everything when it comes to what classes you want to take. Okay, let's talk a little bit about, speaking of, past classes and everything, past Wild Wonders, could you talk a little bit about your past experiences at the conference, either teaching or as an attendee?
Yeah, absolutely. It's been such a pleasure to get to teach at these, and that's kind of the obvious thing is it is such an incredibly professionally run conference that it's always a pleasure to be a teacher, and then I always learn a huge amount while I'm preparing to teach, and then also just from the interactions with people and their questions. It's always incredibly rewarding. But I also am so grateful to be able to attend the rest of the conference every year and learn from all the other amazing instructors. And it's been just a fantastic combination of getting to take classes from people whose work I've been admiring on Instagram for years, and get to actually watch their process for a full hour and a half and see how they work and listen to them talk, and discovering all sorts of new people that I didn't know about before too, and get to see how they work too. Definitely my favorite thing ever is looking through other people's sketchbooks and watching them draw. And so this is this astounding 5 days of just getting to revel in other people's processes and in their sketchbooks.
Yeah, I wish there was. Did you go to you went to some of the in-person ones?
No, so I
Okay.
did not attend the Asilomar conference. I didn't, I wasn't a part of it until the first virtual one.
Yeah, because there was a journal share, and it was crazy because there was so many sketchbooks and journals out, and there was some zines too. I saw one of still my favorite zine, and I've never been able to get the person to like make more of it because it was a hand-drawn zine.
Yeah.
Someone did a class, a comics class, and in the class you made a zine. I did like 3 of the pages and never finished it. but there was one at that journal share about flies
Ooh.
and how you would totally dig it. It was all
Oh,
about
yes,
how
I would.
butterflies suck and get all this, like, butterflies get all this attention. But there's all these other flies that play really important roles, and it was amazing.
I
But
want it.
yeah, I know, right? I'll reach
That
out.
person out there, yeah, definitely needs to make it available. I am right in the middle of reading. In fact, I was looking for it, see if I could hold it up, but I don't think it's on my desk. The Secret Life of Flies. I'm reading right now. It's an awesome book.
Wow. Okay. Yeah, it was Constance Taylor is her name.
Oh,
So
okay.
if you're watching, please bring back the Flies zine. There's multiple people out here that would pay for it. Yes, if there was a virtual way to do a sketchbook sharing, that would make Wild Wonder even better. Okay, what is your top tip for someone who has never been to the conference before?
Ooh, that's a really good question. I would say just remind yourself you can go back to the videos. It's a lot at once. It's if you're trying to keep up and draw along to everything, it's a lot. And that, so I think that attending as many things in person while they're happening live is incredible, because just the energy is, when you know it's live, even if it doesn't change a whole lot about it, when you know it's live, the energy is just different. But understanding that focus and attention and energy just aren't going to last at the same level with that kind of intensity. And that, at least for myself, I can really enjoy, if I'm tired, I love just sitting back and watching people and listening and thinking, great, I am really looking forward to doing this myself. I'm going to come back with the recording and then I'm going to follow along. And I think especially too, if you are feeling overwhelmed and like the classes are moving really fast, when you go back and replay it, you can always hit pause. You can always take all the time you want to catch up and to spend your time on things. And so just keeping that in mind and not feeling like you have to do it all right then, I think is helpful.
So did you do a lot as a video? Did you do a lot of the classes as a video later?
Oh yeah, I always
year?
do. So I do. I always end up doing. I probably managed to make it to more than half of them while they're happening live. But I'm never able to clear my schedule so I can do all of them. And so then I always have a bunch that I'm super looking forward to that I do later as videos slowly over the course of the next 9 months while they're still up. But yeah, no, it's this nice treat going, oh, I still have these classes to look forward to that I haven't done yet.
I don't know why, but I am not able, it's hard for me to motivate for video classes. And so I don't think I've done even one full video class after the event is over. But yeah, so it's just a little bit harder for me to sit. Yeah. Okay, great. So that was really cool. Are you ready for the lightning round?
Yes, I am.
Okay. Can you make a lightning sound? Nice. Okay. So first ones are just short answer, and like yes or no or short one-word answer, and then there's some longer ones. Starting with, is coffee an essential art supply?
Ooh. Essential life supply, yes.
Okay. So yes. Fast or slow?
Both.
Birds or bugs?
Whoa, both.
Organized or messy?
Organized.
Alone or with other people?
Oh man, I'm sorry, but both.
Snacks?
Yes.
Are you a perfectionist?
Very context dependent. When I'm nature journaling, no, I am not.
Ink or graphite?
Ink, always.
When it comes to art supplies, do you maximize or minimize?
Minimize.
Experiment or refine?
Well, if I have to pick, experiment.
Generalist or specialist?
Specialist, but with an eye always towards how all those specializations fit into the big picture.
Rule breaker or rule maker?
Again, context specific, but in the context of nature journaling, definitely rule breaker.
Big picture or micro?
Well, again, how the micro fits into the macro.
Okay, jungle or desert?
These are really hard. Desert.
Okay, and then what face do you make when you are nature journaling something for a while and then realize it is totally different than what you thought it was?
How about, ooh, I learned something new.
Nice. Okay, if you could have a nature journaling superpower, what superpower would you want to have?
I would like to be Ant-Man. I would like to be able to be that size, and I would like to be able to talk to ants. I didn't know anything about Ant-Man until recently, and the fact that Ant-Man can also communicate with the ants totally sealed the deal.
Whoa, okay. I
Yeah.
did have one person say they wanted to be really small for their superpower so they could go into holes and find out what was happening in them. So,
It's a good one.
okay. If you could go into a time machine and go to any period in life history or even Earth or the universe's history and nature journal, if you could nature journal anywhere in time, where in time would you want to nature journal? You could go into the future too if you want to.
Oh, man. Wow, that's really hard. um, I don't know. There's just so many things. I'm sorry, I don't have a fast answer. I guess I would like to see what it was like. This is because of a book I'm reading right now about boreal forests. I would like to see what it was like previous to the last ice age when tree lines were higher, the direction that they're heading again now, to see what that was like. I know it's not going to be the same this time around, but I would love to go and see maybe some of that foreshadowing.
Cool. Okay. That's a very informed answer. And if you could only bring 5 nature journaling supplies in the time machine with you, what supplies would you take?
Oh, well, that's plenty. I would like to take a sketchbook and a fountain pen and a bottle of ink and a watercolor palette and a brush.
Great. You had that one already. Okay. In the nature journaling Olympics, which event would you participate in?
I would participate in the drawing with a brush pen while running at a jog.
Nice.
As much as I can.
It's a great one. Okay. And then last lightning round question is, which animal species would be best at nature journaling?
Well, okay. So I'm going to answer this again based on a book I just finished about bee intelligence. Some just astounding research into just how flexible and amazing decision makers bees are, all sorts of bees, not just honeybees. And so I just learned so much about how much faster they process information. So they're processing images and smells at a rate that we can't even comprehend, and making decisions at a speed that we can't comprehend, and taking in so much about the world around them. And so that's why I thought of them for the nature journaling, is that their observational skills are unsurpassed. So clearly they would be amazing at nature journaling flowers.
Wow. Awesome.
And if anyone cares, that's the mind of a bee, and it's really amazing.
Okay, next time I do an episode on best books for nature journalers, I think I'm gonna have to have you on.
I've got a lot.
Okay, that was one of the most popular episodes that I did. Okay, yay! Good job in the lightning round. Okay, so let's talk a little bit about nature journaling beginners. Let's start with this one. Do you have any funny stories about when you were first getting started, or when you were learning some basic art techniques, or any funny stories from when you were a beginner?
Oh boy. I don't know if I have any funny stories. Well, okay, so it's not exactly nature journaling, and it is maybe not even that funny, but it's the best I can do. So my drawing and science have always gone hand in hand. And so definitely the origins of any nature journaling that I do is way back in time, field sketching, but also a lot of lab sketching, since that was definitely the most fun part of science labs and science classes was, putting all of the information down essentially in images and words in my sketchbook. So I used to do a whole lot of microscopy when I was in graduate school. I was studying millipede sperm. And so I'm bringing this up not because it's a funny story, but it's just a slightly funny sounding topic. So I was looking at millipede sperm in a whole bunch of different ways, different types of microscopy, and drawing them. And what's really amazing about millipede sperm is they look like, most of them, they differ by different species of millipede. You can probably tell the family of millipede you have just by the shape of their sperm. And they look like, for the most part, little flying saucers or hats. Tiny, tiny sort of disc-shaped things with interesting, different specific shapes. And then they pair up, possibly while still in the male, possibly once they've been inserted into the female. So you've got these like two flying saucers stuck to each other on their bases.
That's a good story.
That's what I've got for you.
Yeah, no, I love it, and hopefully there will be a class in the future on drawing millipede sperm under the microscope fast and slow.
There you go.
Okay, what about experiences of self-doubt or feeling like your artwork is not good enough? I think sometimes an obstacle at the conference is people show up and they see all of these instructors, and a lot of times the conference, all of the visual stuff advertising the conference chooses like the most polished looking things. And we have this really great drawing by John Muir Laws as like the logo for the conference. And so there's like a major anchor effect that happens when people show up at something and they see all of this imagery, sometimes hearing from other people. So like maybe if you have any experiences about that, or thoughts about self-doubt and personal experiences with feeling like your artwork wasn't good enough, that you can share.
Oh, absolutely. So I'm also a natural science illustrator. And so in addition to doing what I think of as very experimental and loose and energetic and non-perfectionist stuff in my sketchbook, I also do a lot of finished artwork that I have to be a perfectionist about and spend a lot of time on. And I think that the thing that is the most helpful thing that I have known for a really long time, and still have to always remind myself of, is that the most life in art is definitely not in the most finished, polished artwork. There's a lot of importance. I do a lot of it myself, a lot of artwork that I've spent a lot of time erasing and trying to get right, and restarting because it's not right, and trying to get it as accurate as possible. But my most accurate artwork is definitely not my liveliest artwork, not the artwork that I think is the most important, and definitely not the artwork that brings life and understanding and joy and learning to me. That is the artwork that is completely imperfect and was done in the field, or not even in the field, but was done without any expectation of perfection, and was my first reaction to the thing that I was looking at. And I think that, so at this point, I have a huge amount of experience. I've been doing this a really long time, and that it still can be easy to sort of write that off because I have a lot of experience. And so the stuff that I do that is loose and imperfect still comes out, sort of the way I want it to most of the time. And that can be the absolute hardest thing about being a beginner, is what you see in your head is not going to be what comes out on the page. And I think that the thing that I would like everyone to, believe me about the most is that disconnect between what's in your head and what's on the page is a really personal thing and doesn't really have anything to do with the value and quality of what is on your page. And that's because you were observing and translating what you observed into something on the page. There's a huge amount of value and beauty in what came out on the page, even if it is not accurate, because you're not necessarily going for an accurate representation of what's out there in the world. You're going for the translation of that experience of what you saw onto the page. And I can say with absolute confidence that, I spend a huge amount of time looking at other people's artwork, both in real life and on Instagram. And it is not the professional artists, and it's not the people with the most experience whose artwork I learn the most from. I absolutely learn the most from the people who were the most engaged in observing. And that doesn't have anything to do with how much experience you have. First time drawers drawing things, kids that I'm working with that obviously can't have been drawing that long. Some of the most full of life drawings on the page come just from the people who are the most connected and the most engaged in what they're observing. And so I know it's so hard when you're looking at your own artwork on the paper to let go of that deep need to see what you wanted it to be on the page, even if it's not. But just understand that from other people's perspectives, the more engaged you are, the more connection you're feeling with what you're drawing. That absolutely comes through on the page, and that's what the real important, lively artwork is.
Cool. Okay, good to know. Okay, so let's talk about your book, The Cold Canyon Fire Journals. Could you just tell us a little bit more about that project? And I'll put the people can buy that also through your website or on Heyday. Is it heyday.com?
Yes, it's heyday.com. I'm pretty sure.
you can tell us a little bit about the book, and I'll look up the Heyday address.
I'm sure it's .com, not .org. Yeah. So the book came out of, I was looking for a project that I could do to put myself in some particular place in an ongoing way over time and follow it through direct documentation in field sketching. And I was sort of looking for a topic to focus on when a natural reserve burned in a wildfire near where I live. And it became clear that that was the perfect opportunity to visit a place regularly and watch it change fairly rapidly after the fire. And so I was looking for something to document in drawing, in nature journaling, and then a way to use that as my primary way of communicating about what I was learning. So again, rather than finished science illustrations, these really much more directly experienced drawings done while I was there. And so what the book is actual pages from my sketchbooks. Over the 6 years that I was following this canyon, when it had a fire, I started following it. Then 5 years later, it had another fire. So it went through also some of the shortened intervals in burning that we are now experiencing due to climate change. And so that became a part of the story as well. And then there's also a narrative in words about this journey and what I learned about all of the different organisms that live in the reserve and what fire meant to them, and my own personal journey of understanding that fire is not not just something that species recover from, but something that a whole lot of species are waiting for. They're not waiting for the big, mature, leafy green forests that we have at the end. They're waiting for this burned area because it has all of the things that are critical for their needs.
Mm-hmm. Why did you want to make a book that was based on journal pages done in the field as opposed to like more finished illustrations?
Because I was really wanting to experiment with ways of inviting people into my experience in as sort of direct and immediate a way as possible. So sort of like I said in my answer, a couple questions back, was I think that the more an artwork gets refined, the more removed from the original experience of observation it gets, and the less it has, gives a sort of visceral connection to the subject matter. And again, I'm definitely not saying that finished artwork doesn't have its place, because I do that a lot too. But I think for a particular kind of communication, which was wanting people to experience this along with me, because I think there's such incredibly important lessons that I learned and that I wanted to share about ecology and about what's happening in the warming world, that I thought that this was a way to really have people be able to experience being there on the trail with me in a way that that I think more finished artwork would not have done quite as much, and that I think just writing wouldn't have done either.
Was that a hard sell for publishing companies to be like, hey, I want to take these like sort of unfinished, sort of sketchy type things and make a book out of it?
Well, it might have been. I only worked with Heyday. I didn't try other places, but I think it's very true that because Heyday has already been willing to be in this space of images and words coexisting in a way that are not the norm in published books, that it was more immediately obvious to them how this worked together. This is a somewhat unusual way of illustrating a book at this point. There are plenty of books that are about sketching and about art techniques, but letting the unfinished work sort of stand alone as the illustrations is not as common.
Yeah, I've done a little bit of research of the literature of published books that show like journals and sketchbooks, and there's not really that many. There's like a couple of these books that have like different explorers journals and stuff, and there's a few like urban sketching books where they include sketching, but in terms of like others, it's not a huge thing. Okay, well, I think that your answer to that segues really nicely into talking about eco reportage. So could you talk a little bit more about that? I mean, like going to your website, it comes up right away, and in your blurb, your description on the Wild Wonder teacher description, it's like right there in the first sentence. Could you talk a little bit more about that?
So that was the concept of putting myself in a place over and over again to watch it change over time and to experience that for myself and document it in some way. That was the reason that I did the Cold Canyon project, and was something that I had been thinking about for a few years before that, of really being able to. So my interest in nature and biology has always been focused on change. And so I was originally studying evolutionary biology. That's where the millipede sperm came in. And I started out on this really big time scale of change and gradually narrowed it. After graduate school, I worked in stream restoration for a long time, looking at reporting on stream habitat restoration projects and stream monitoring and fish passage and things like that. So again, looking at ecological change, but this time on a much shorter time frame. And so when I decided that I wanted to focus even more on science communication and doing that in a visual manner, I really wanted to then experiment with doing so in a really personal and on the scene approach. And so that is what I've been calling eco-reportage, the idea of personally experiencing change, experiencing the world, moving around us, and understanding myself as a part of that change, as influencing that change, as being influenced by that change, and then using that as a way to take my own direct experience in one particular place and help me to then understand what's going on around the world. And I absolutely started this because of my own concerns, anxieties, grief about climate change. But it doesn't necessarily always have, I mean, fire definitely has a real climate change overarching aspect to it, but it really doesn't have to, that doesn't have to be, and I don't mean it to be always the driving factor. It's the world is always changing around us. It's not just climate change. The world has always been changing. Even if you don't see things changing, that's still change. And so just using this as a way of understanding yourself, sort of in this constant process of being in the world and changing with the world. And then because I like to document things and I want to have this memory for myself and way of communicating with other people, that's where the sort of the documentation aspect of eco-reportage comes in. And for me, it's very visual, but it really could be any kind of documentation in terms of writing, or, you know, it could be in terms of math and numbers. It could be in terms of sound and music. Just happens that I like to draw.
This is jogging my memory because I think that the other time that I interviewed you about your work and stuff, I ended up titling the whole video "Nature Journaling Change," because I had forgotten that, but now that you mentioned it, I'm remembering how the whole change piece. So why did you call your Instagram, and like I think your newsletter is called this as well, Anthropocene Sketchbook?
So because, again, my own particular interest in following change in the world is very much driven by an interest in what is happening because of human impacts, and Anthropocene being the time that we are in where human-driven impacts are the greatest ones in the world. I apologize. Becoming less and less articulate, apparently. So in the Anthropocene, understanding ourselves and how we are fitting into our immediate surroundings, and then what that means for how all humans are fitting into our surroundings, and the fact that we are all of us impacting the world and being impacted by it, and again, being aware that this is, you know, that everything is moving, and I want to document and be able to observe as much of that as I can.
Okay, so we've been talking for like 50 minutes, and it's a lot. I know this takes a lot of mental energy and stuff like that, so I can totally relate if you're feeling you know, like not as eloquent or polished or whatever, but there's a couple more sort of big topics. How do you feel about continuing on a little bit more about the Anthropocene? Okay,
I'm
just checking
yeah.
in. Okay, so let's talk about climate change, mass extinction, the Anthropocene. What does it mean? What do you think it means to be? I mean, nature journaling is like a beautiful pastime, and it can be like really creative and everything. But what do you think it means to be a nature journaler during one of the biggest extinction events in Earth history and during the times that we're living in?
Yeah. So the biggest and most important thing to me is sort of feeling as though I am not not withdrawing, but doing the exact opposite, but going further into the things that I'm scared of and the things that I'm um, worried about, and using field sketching, using nature journaling as a way of both having my eyes open so that so that I do know exactly what's happening around me, um, of constantly reminding myself that I am a part of what's happening, and having a way of putting into context everything else that I read about and hear about happening in other parts of the world, putting that into the context of what I know is happening here. Um, and then being able to share with people all over the world what's happening here, and um, to find all of those shared experiences that everyone across the world is experiencing, and to understand how things can be quite different too,
Mm-hmm.
which is also interesting and important. But so much of it is just a wanting to just put myself even more fully into what I'm scared of, because I would much rather be part of it, and know what's happening,
Mm-hmm.
than to just shut it
Avoid it
out
or.
and turn
Mhm.
away. Yeah.
Okay, so this is something that comes up because just to be like fully transparent, this is a topic I'm very interested in and passionate about. Um, so it seems like sometimes people have the reaction that like I don't want a nature journal certain topics because it'll make me like sad or whatever. So some people don't point their nature journal at extinction or destruction or things that are potentially like negative things that are happening in the environment around them. What do you think about that? Do you think that maybe, are you saying that maybe it can actually be so sort of therapeutic, or in some ways can actually be beneficial to not listen to that feeling?
So, yeah, and I have two separate reasons why it can be really beneficial to not listen to that feeling. And so the fire one is the first and most obvious one. So what has become probably the most important thing to me as a result of that experience is walking towards the things that seem scary or ugly or disgusting or upsetting in some way, walking towards them and being willing to set aside all of our very deeply conditioned modern Western feelings about those things, and be open to the fact that there's so much beauty once we start to look at things from other both other moments in humanity's past eyes, but also other species eyes, things that our first reaction is to recoil from, are actually quite beautiful, um, to other things than us. So to all of the species that need that immediately burned area, like a woodpecker, a burned forest is not ugly. It's beautiful because it's full of resources and it's where they want to live, and that's beauty. Um, and so choosing to go towards that myself, um, even when my first reaction to this place that I'd grown up hiking was sadness and loss, and that it was not as beautiful as it used to be, was to be able to realize that in fact so many things there are beautiful. And it doesn't mean that that then turns everything around and everything that was bad becomes wonderful and hopeful, because of course that's not the case. I learned about all the beauty in that immediately burned area. That doesn't change the fact that as burning patterns change, of course, fires can be dangerous and destructive and can absolutely change the habitat from what it was. And so there are still very much those aspects of grief and fear and concern. But being able to find those re-envisionings of things, some things as beautiful, and understanding all of these moments of beauty, and then also understanding all of the connections that are out there that I didn't know about before, that I never would have known if I had shied away from the things that seemed beautiful or frightening, make me extremely glad that I didn't turn away from that. And then on, in many ways, a less dramatic level, but I think it's a really helpful one to keep in mind. I'm also really interested in changing conceptions about what is beautiful just in the normal cycle of life and death and decay as well. And understanding that all of the things that gross us out and make us disgusted and horrified or scared, like death, so much beauty in those parts of the life cycle. To just, again, think through the eyes, see through the eyes, think through the perspectives of all of the organisms who make their living on dead things or excrement or things like that. That's beautiful to them. That is beauty. And so, again, the more we ignore that, the more we're ignoring these hugely important and wonderful parts of the world.
Okay, so we're officially at 5, but I have a couple just closing questions here since we opened up this can. Why? Okay, so one thing I've noticed, I think I proposed it like the second Wild Wonder or something. When I proposed what classes I wanted to teach, I proposed teaching something about nature journaling during, what is it, the 6th great extinction that we're in. That was not chosen as a topic. And so I guess, why do you think that there's not any topics about climate change or mass extinction, or like nature journaling environmental destruction, or like nature journaling grief of like a lost species or anything like that?
Well, I don't think I can answer why there isn't.
Okay.
I mean, I definitely don't know. I think, yeah, I guess from my own personal experience in sort of having, I think in having the same motivations in what I do as you do in what you do, and from the experience of doing the project with the book and writing the book, I think a lot of times it's hard for people to go straight head on into the words climate change and
Right. Okay, perfect. So then,
because my book definitely was about those things,
right.
but came to them without being.
Yeah. So how can we ease into it then? Like, do you have any tips or suggestions? Like, what if there's someone who maybe wants to start trying to nature journal this a little bit more, or any other tips for like easing into the...
Well, okay. So, and I think it just depends on what your goals are. In many ways, it just depends on the context, because I don't feel like I'm easing into it when I'm saying Anthropocene sketchbook, for example. So I think for one's own personal, so for the people who are feeling like, yes, this is why I am nature journaling. I am nature journaling because I do feel like I'm watching an extinction and I want to be on the front lines and I want to be recording that. I don't think there's any reason to shy away from facing that headlong. I think for people who feel like they are perhaps teaching nature journaling, or trying to reach a broader audience that isn't ready for that, then at least for my own self, it's definitely through the specific examples that I approach it. So again, approaching it through a specific thing like wildfire. Even that is a big topic, but it's not quite the same thing as saying I'm doing this about climate change. Or through something even less immediately impactful, like pollinators. So let's start with pollinators, and let's learn about these interactions. Let's learn about this ecology, and then let's talk about what's going on in the world and why are pollinators important? What's going on with pollinators? Why are we concerned? But then also, what can we do? And that's the other thing too about fire. One of the other reasons not to be scared about going towards the things that are scary and ugly is also within them. There's so much hope because within them are some of the answers. Fire is one of the answers to fire. We need to understand that we have a totally messed up relationship with fire. And one of the ways that we heal is by fixing our relationship with fire and actually making sure there's more fire out there. And so that's just one example. To, go deeply into anything, like my example of pollinators. Once you're in it, there are absolutely hopeful things and things that you can be doing. And so I think that certainly has been my approach to, I want everything I do to be addressing essentially climate change. But I'm going to go about it through some really specific ecological concepts or specific organisms or specific, few species interactions that then take us into that discussion.
So great tip. Great tip there is to focus on something specific and maybe start with something that you're already interested or curious about. It could be maybe like native plants or, beachside plants and beachside erosion, or pollinators and different bee species that are going extinct or endangered, and then kind of work your way. That's a great tip, Robin. Thanks for, I think that makes it a lot more manageable. And then just the last question, to close things off here, is, I guess what I want to ask is, I've asked you a bunch of questions, and we talked about a lot of different things, but maybe take a few seconds to think if there's something that we didn't talk about that is really important or that you want to share or make sure we at least mention.
Well, you are really thorough. So I am pretty sure I don't have anything else to add. That was a fantastic series of questions. And definitely because you and I are in this for a lot of the same reasons, you definitely hit all of the things that I think are most important in your questions. So I'm quite comfortable with what we covered.
Okay, cool. Well, I do like to, it's like a sneaky way to kind of, sometimes I think people maybe need a little bit more time to really think into it, but it's just a sneaky way to like get outside of my own head with where everything has been going. So, well, Robin, thank you so much for making the time to be on the show. And I'm definitely looking forward to your class at Wild Wonder this year. And I will keep following you online. I still haven't gotten your book yet though. So I definitely need to get that.
Yeah, absolutely. And actually, I happen to have one extra one that I can send you. So,
ooh, with the signature? Oh,
with
wow, that would be awesome.
Yes, I absolutely. Just you should send me your mailing address.
Okay, I will, and then I can do a little episode about it or a little unboxing or something when I get it. That'd be great.
Yeah, cool. Absolutely, my pleasure. Well, thank you. This has been a wonderful conversation.
Yay. All right. Thanks everyone for tuning in. Lots of people were involved in the live chat. Eli, Susan, Gail, James. All right. Bye everybody.
Bye.
Bye.